This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Well, Emily, since you were kind of the impetus for us all deciding to get together and do this, is there anything that you would like to lead off with?
So a couple of things first, before we get started, well, we're starting so people can hear this when they hear the recording. I don't listen to too much content anymore. I mean, that's not true. I listen to a lot of content, but I listen to a lot of content that I refer to as nonsense with syntax, because my brain needs information feel like coming in all of the time in order to sort of function. And I have to listen to things that don't require a great amount of thought or focus so that I can, as I'm listening to the nonsense with syntax, continue thinking about whatever it is my mind is wanting to do. So generally that means I listen to politics, which I don't care about, or sports, which I do care about, but I don't think is important in the way most people think it's important. I think it's important for other reasons. So I listen to a lot of tennis and gymnastics podcasts these days, and I listen to a lot of political nonsense that Danny and I will cover on Wednesday nights on our live stream that are basically meaningless, but a lot of fun. On one level it's meaningful, but I don't care about that. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when I do listen to anything that is super out there, woo, underground, the kind of stuff I used to really listen to a lot of, it's because I feel like something is guiding me towards that, or because someone who I respect has asked me to take a listen to something or take a look at something. I used to listen to content 25 hours a day when I was a tweaker and had nothing but time because it didn't exist. And I just don't anymore, right? And since I sort of started pursuing the more synchromistic path, I prefer to sort of preserve my stream of ideas and not sort of cross with too many other people, just because I if the streams are clear and then there's clearly something that crosses between them, it's more real than if we're listening to each other's shit all the time and we start sort of seeing what the other person has described in a way that shapes and forms our reality, right? So I don't listen to too many people that do similar things to what I do anymore. Sure. But I did listen to your podcast. I don't know completely why. Something was push that one. And it was actually, I think, I don't know how widely listened to or watched it was. I think you guys were still just doing audio at that time. So I don't know that there was a video that went along with the first one. I can't recall. But there was a video that went along with the first one. Okay. I think I listened on the the podcast app. So, so for me, it was the most important thing that I listened to all year. And I think that it's something more people should listen to, because I think it's really much more informative of A, the nature of our reality, and B, what's actually going on, than all the things that people spend a lot of time listening to. You're just a man recounting your experience, right? But pretty much it was loaded with all of the sort of important factors. And most importantly for me, it was I had never heard of you, right? Like
Uh-huh.
I've never seen a video from you. No one has ever told me anything about you. And there were so many items that sort of connected to very important threads or cross-pollinated with different ideas that both myself and my good friend and podcast partner, Michael Wan, have been laying out for the past 4 years in a way that, like, you know, from listening to you, I was pretty sure you weren't aware of what we had been doing, right? So it was like, oh, these are two completely independent tracks that have so many connective threads that, like, there's not more, to me, there's not better evidence that can come about to confirm things that were sort of, you know, it's interesting when I say it. If Michael has a similar experience or story or something that parallels it, that's a coincidence. If there's a third person, now there's a pattern, right? And you're so different than we are that it wasn't like, well, everybody who's like you guys thinks those things or says those same things, right?
Right.
So I'm going to give you feedback based on my personal experiences, my research, and then the synchronistic storytelling that Michael and I have been doing and I've done myself for the last several years. I'm totally okay with it. If you think everything I say is nonsense, I don't know if what I have to say is important or.
Well, you've already said the nicest thing someone said to me all year, which is that you thought it was an important podcast or an important story or something to that effect. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, right. So I don't know if what I have to say matters or if it's just my personal insights or opinion. I don't expect, right, anyone to agree with me or for people to appreciate my commentary on your experience in the same way that I appreciated listening to your commentary on your experience. And that includes you. So I'm just offering this from my lifetime of weird experiences and knowings and researches, and whatever the outcome of it is fine. It's been a little bit interesting the last couple of weeks as we prepared the first time to do this and prepared the second time to do it. Some of the upheaval that has happened in my own reality around certain people and certain topics and certain things. And I don't know for sure that it's connected, but I suspect strongly that it's connected. And at some point during the course of this, you know, I may say like what that is and why. And then,
okay.
and then lastly, I must admit that I am torn between admiration and fear of you. Right? Like there's part of me that really like admires your chutzpah and like your clarity of mind in a very challenging situation. And there's another part of me that is like, damn, if things ever get crazy, I don't know if I want to be around that fucker because he's going to pour gas on the fire. Right. And the truth is probably like some of each, which generally makes for the most interesting experiences. And just as we are saying this, the plasma feather orbs have joined us. So, okay. So those are sort of what I wanted to say up front, and I'm ready to sort of get started. Is there anything before I start sort of digging into? I have 6 pages of notes here, which is a lot for me. I don't take notes as feverishly as Hunter or Laura do. Laura is my partner who does the show with us as well. But I also know that probably a single page of this could open hours of conversation. So at a certain point, I stopped, right? And if you or anyone else finds this valuable or you want to continue with this, I'm happy to do part 2 or 3 or 4 here or on your show or on my show or whatever it feels appropriate. But at a certain point, it was like, this is information overload. I have to stop for myself and for everybody else's mental well-being. Okay.
All right. Well, what you got?
All right. Well, just real quickly before we start, right? Like, I don't really know too much about you. I've only listened to this and then the part 2, which I have thoughts about, but I haven't done any like analysis on yet. And so like, anything like you want to tell me about yourself that either you feel is important, or that at the time that before this occurred, you wouldn't have thought it was important about your background or your childhood or your family, but now you recognize that maybe it is, or anything like that? Just just curious.
I guess I've always been a singer. Annoyingly, like my teachers would say, comments on my report card like, Joseph is lovely to have in class, but he's always singing.
And are you singing because you're happy, or are you singing because stuff is coming through, and so you're just allowing it to pass through you, and it's coming into your mind and coming out of your mouth?
Yeah, that's it. It's mostly even when I'm reading or listening to a podcast, there's constantly music in my head.
Yep.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting that you would choose that as something to tell me, because one of the things anybody who has lived with me would know about me is that I'm singing all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's like songs we know. Sometimes it's like nonsense that I'm making up in my head. Oftentimes it's nonsense that I'm making up in my head to the rhythm of a song that we know, a combination of different songs or whatever it is. And like, it's endless. It's ongoing and endless. Right. So that's fascinating that you knew to tell me this.
I'm just laughing because this is an ongoing thing that happens in our house. And Chris is like, why do you keep singing that line? Or like, there's just some sound, some repetitive sound that comes up where it feels like I'm tuning into a radio station.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think you'll like to know is that we were always in the swimming pool growing up. My mom's a coach, and my sisters were nationally ranked swimmers, so we were constantly in the water. I've heard you mention that was big with your family too.
So I don't know if being in the water was big with my family, but I certainly have had interesting experiences in the water. And I was a reasonably high level athlete. For me, it was gymnastics. But I do want to say ask one more question about the songs, or a couple of questions about the songs. Do you have the experience where like someone will say something or something will happen and it cues a song right away, like immediately, almost like someone pushed the thing in the jukebox?
Yeah, incessantly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like that too. Big time.
Okay. And then do you also have like with some of the songs, even if you've never seen the video, right, or whatnot, is there like a set of visuals or like tone or texture or time period that often comes along with them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. That's, do you have a specific kind of music that you like?
Yeah, I like classic rock from the 70s mostly. 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Okay.
Like the band that I didn't want to like, but I fell in love with them anyway, was the Eagles.
Okay.
Eagles.
Yes.
So like I have a lot of 70s and 80s sort of classic, like when you talked about Fleetwood Mac, right? I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That goes along with some of my experiences. I got a Queen shirt on tonight. A lot of my stuff is a little bit more like, I like some of that music, but I also really like a lot of that sort of late 70s, early 80s, sort of like pop, rock, punk, like Blondie and, Pat Benatar and like that, like those songs, a lot of the songs from the late 70s and early 80s are almost theme songs for like moments or periods of time in my life, even though that wasn't music that was heavily listened to in my home or anything like that. So I have lots of thoughts and ideas about that. And then for me, like I've always been really strongly attracted to dance music, and it, which eventually took like the form of like house and techno. But prior to that, it was the most like electronic or synth driven sort of new wave or pop music that was sort of available in the 80s or whatever it was, right? There was something about that really pulled me in as well. And then like all that mid 80s, like Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, all that kind of sound that had like a mixture of world music and synthesizers and stuff like that was also, it feels like seated deeper than just, this is the music I liked and this was the soundtrack of our lives. Like it feels like there's something more to it. So I understand sort of.
Well, what do you think there is? What more to it is there than just the music and loving it and having it be in our heads and part of our way to relate to each other?
So
what else is there?
So I think there's I mean, I have a number of ideas about different kinds of things, but particularly with certain songs that like at one time I would have referred to it as that I am programmed to, right? Now I see it as something different, is that the song became a frame of reference for a reality that I was experiencing. Like there's actually like one of my favorite songs of all times, like is Hungry Like the Wolf by Duran Duran, right? I never saw that video until recently, but the video is almost exactly like what it is like in the place that I go to that elicits that song for me, right? Like I remember returning to a place as an adult that I had been at as a child, and while I was there, that song sort of came to mind with like a set of visuals. And then much later, I saw the video. I'm like, oh my God, that's like exactly what I was like thinking and feeling at the time that came in. It was almost like I felt like a wolf. Like I felt like an animalistic sort of energy or feeling. Like I think we live in an awfully strange place that has been compartmentalized and sort of contained into, for what most people appears to be like a single stream 3D reality. And there are certain locations that that sort of break out of that, and whether those are inspirations for songs that are written about them, or whether sort of they create pop songs to compartmentalize people's memories or feelings about these experiences. You know, oh, it's just the song, it's just the video, you must have seen the video, that didn't really happen, or you know, whatever it is. I think there's like this kind of gets into some of the same stuff that like a lot of people in your experience were like asking you about who they looked like from the music world or from the movie or whatnot, right? Like I think music, I think pop culture has been a way to encapsulate something that is much grander than just like a song or story or movie or whatever it is. That's how they've sort of memorialized it, fed it to the public, so that when people recount something that maybe sounds similar to that, oh, you must have seen that in the movies or heard it in a song or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I think that music is also a way for people that are in a big club to communicate with each other in kind of a dog whistle language with their imagery, and the public's none the wiser. So like for example, I heard Bill Burr on the Dana Carvey and David Spade podcast, Fly on the Wall. Sorry to mention another podcast here, but Bill Burr was saying he wanted to talk about drumming, and Dana asked him who he liked better out of Ringo and Charlie Watts. And I was thinking like, well, John Lennon famously said that Ringo's not even the best drummer in the Beatles. So Ringo was an adequate drummer, but eventually Paul McCartney, or the man that took over for Paul McCartney, started playing all the important drum tracks for the Beatles. But Bill Burr, he said Ringo was his favorite drummer. And I was thinking that's a very politic answer, considering that Charlie Watts recently died and Ringo is still alive. And he might even be listening to this podcast, you know?
Yeah, there's layers to that, right? Like there's a lot of layers to that. I agree with you. All of our media and all of our entertainment is encoded in a way that people who know the code they might still enjoy the song or the movie or whatever it is, but they're
Yeah.
also picking up what's being put down for them. And that actually plays into a story that's really big in the media right now that I'll bring up later in regards to how it correlates to sort of your story. I also think that because music is frequency based, I think certain information is stored at certain frequency bands, right?
Mhm.
And so stimulation, or like the stimulation of that field, or opening it up, or sort of attaching your consciousness to that field in a specific way. Like, you don't think about a certain thing unless that field is open for you. And it's a way of sort of opening up, but then closing down and compartmentalizing, you know, ranges of, like, you know, sort of mental ranges,
Yeah.
right? Or psychological ranges that isn't part of your day-to-day life. You might have this weird thought that occurs to you every time you hear a certain sound, or every time you're in a specific location. And it isn't until it's happened a number of times, and only if you're paying attention, do you recognize there's a pattern here. And like, why is that? Like, why does this one idea come to my mind? Not even like if the song has these lyrics, but if I hear this sound, it literally stimulates the same thought or the same action or the same feeling every single time. And I think humans can be played like instruments, dude. And they're masters at this, right? So
I think of that song Wildfire when I was a little girl, and listening to this song and the narrative of this song and how powerful it was for a child. And I think that that energy is definitely manipulated with children and music. And you can really create these realms as a little girl or a little boy, because the music is so visual that you get encapsulated in some reality. And that could be maybe the experiment, is how many children are able or capable of doing that.
I mean, absolutely. There's also, like, I till this day, if you turn on the song Flashdance from the movie by Giorgio Moroder, like, my energy level will increase immediately, exponentially. Like, I feel like I could literally scale a wall or climb a wall. And there's other songs that do that sort of similarly. But if one were to take like every song that they like and become like exactly in tune with what the feeling that's being generated instantly the moment that song starts, right? Like, that would be sort of like a cataloging of emotion attached to frequency that would be really interesting. And it's going to be different for different people. But literally the phase change, the phase shift for me, that like I can be like lead legs, no energy when I'm exercising. Someone puts on Flashdance and I'm just like on the other side of the field, right? It's every time. It's like like it works every time, right? So I think it's all very sort of personalized and attached to a lot of different things. Let me just ask you real quick before we start into this. Were you an athlete as a child, or like heavily dedicated to something, if not sports, like maybe something like playing an instrument or some other craft or skill?
Yeah, it was like I mentioned before, the swimming was a really big deal. I spent hours a day in the pool every day.
Okay, so you did that. It wasn't just your mom, it was you. Okay.
Yeah.
Was
And
the sisters?
I didn't like it, actually. I started to resent it right about the age of 10.
Okay.
We were a part of this thing called infant swimming research, especially
Oh,
my sisters.
okay.
Yeah. And they would where you the idea was that the kids would be near a pool and they'd be unsafe, because kids left unattended by a pool, they fall in and they drown because they've never been in the water before. So this was like a way to get kids to learn their natural swimming ability. They're seeking air. They can float indefinitely until they rescued out of the pool. But yeah, it was kind of an anti-drowning campaign. But my sisters were a big part of that. Yeah.
Okay. And then you've already said your mom was a swim coach. Was that her full-time work or did she do something else?
Yeah, she was a teacher first, but for years and years she was like head coach um of a pretty serious team in
Okay.
Boulder. Yeah.
In both. So you've lived most of your life in Colorado or all your life in Colorado?
Yeah, all my memories are growing up in Boulder or on vacation, but yeah, we lived here all the time.
Okay. And all your memories were on vacation. Are you saying that you don't remember things from your regular
Oh,
life? You only remember your vacations?
no, I'm just mentioning that's the only time we were away from Boulder because
Got
we've
it.
lived here
Okay.
that entire
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. And then what did your dad do? Just out of curiosity?
He's a chiropractor.
Okay, that's interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that answer, but that is actually interesting. And then your heritage, your genetics, your ethnicity, stuff, all that stuff.
I would say my name, Prystupa, is Ukrainian, but that's
Ah,
just one eighth of my blood.
okay,
And other than that, it's a lot of European countries, supposedly a little bit of Native American.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right, interesting. I didn't think about what price stupa. I didn't think I didn't, Ukraine hadn't popped to mind when I was thinking about that, but that makes sense actually now that you say it. So all right, cool. So and no, were you in the military? Was anyone in your family in the
Oh, yeah.
military?
That's so my grandfather is a retired colonel in the Air Force.
Okay,
And my other I have, let's see, three cousins from my mom's side. Two of them are both Air Force Academy graduates. And when I was graduating high school, my grandfather gave me a stern talking to about how, it would make more sense for me to go to the Air Force Academy.
okay,
Very much wanted me to join that. And I was at that time, I and it's still, I can't fathom going into the military myself. I don't think
okay.
it's for me. I'm not good at marching.
We're taking orders.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And does anyone in your family ever worked for like a military contractor or weapons manufacturer or in
Oh
any kind
yeah.
of like thing like that?
Yeah, I've worked on quite a few facilities. I don't know if I should mention which ones, but there's a lot in Denver. There's a lot
Okay,
in Denver.
I know you have, but I'm just asking about your family before you.
Oh no. Oh, well,
Okay,
I wouldn't know. My grandfather was a fighter pilot and did 100 missions in Vietnam. So
okay,
there's probably things that he saw which he wouldn't share with the
okay.
family. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Let's get started. I
Yeah.
have my baseline. Let's get started. Okay. It's what's weird is like I feel like there could possibly be a page missing from my notes, which I'm very curious about, but I'm not 100% certain, so I'm not going to go tinfoil hat on it. We'll just start
Uh-huh.
where I am. By the way, I thought the story there's a couple of things that I want to point out. The story that Stephen was telling while you were missing from the podcast is
Yeah.
heavily correlated, in my opinion, to actually what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And I also recommend, if you haven't, to listen to the interview that they did with Corey Daniel, who I also was supposed to do this with, that also got pushed off and
Huh.
feels like it's, that's not sort of a mistake. And then the podcast they did with Danny Goler, who I also have interviewed, but and the one I did with him is interesting too. But in terms more specifically of what you're talking, well, actually, you can listen to him on their show or on my show or both. I haven't interviewed Corey or whatever, but there's a lot of information that might not seem to the casual listener to be connected that very definitely is connected. And so I encourage you to listen to what they're talking about and see what that sort of elicits for you.
I will for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So starting with the storm cloud and the craft that was inside that I see, I'm guessing that the picture behind you is is said craft.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just a watercolor I did a while back to kind of show what it looks like tumbling through the sky.
Yeah. There's I've seen items that look like that in the TV series, both Peripheral and Three Body Problem, that are appear when there's a change of reality going on. And so there's a lot of information in some of these television shows. There's also a lot of drama and bullshit and whatever, but they don't get these ideas from nowhere. And there's other people out there that have different interests and skill sets than we do, but that are telling their stories in their own way. Right. And so I don't discount something just because it's a TV show or a movie. In fact, like I look at some of those quite a bit, and it's interesting where some of those ideas trace back to. So you saw this craft when you went outside to go to the porta potty, but you didn't end up going. And this porta potty was at a power plant that was right outside of a Boeing research facility, right?
Yeah, it's their next door neighbor. All right,
you had my attention completely already at this point.
And what town, sorry to interrupt, Emily, what town is this in?
Oh, it's in Chester, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. Okay. It's kind of right on the Delaware River. There's a casino right there that's within walking distance of the plant.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
okay.
This casino is next to the water, next to the Delaware River. They're like a Harrah's casino.
Oh, that's interesting. Harrah's?
Yeah, Harrah's, yeah.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay. All right. So, and I liked the way that you described it, that it was like this shiny white on one side and then like this black hole, light sucking black on the other side. Have you seen the kind of paint that's called Vanta Black?
Is it on some cars? On some luxury cars?
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah.
But
it's just a matte black, right?
It's very matte with quite a lot of depth to it, and it has that feel that it's pulling sort of everything in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or a glossy black, you can see things reflected off of a shiny surface, but this was I couldn't see anything reflecting off it. It was like no reflections at all. Very dark.
Remember that white horse I showed on the last episode of Dark Matter, how it had that sort of sheen? So like I imagine the sort of white being like that and then the black being like this Vanta Black. And then you described it as kind of like a gyroscope, correct?
Yeah. It just seemed to be moving like in a totally inefficient way. An efficient way would have been flying flat like a disc. But this thing was tumbling being pulled off in all different directions, tumbling.
So there's a gentleman that I would say that I'm friendly with. I haven't spoken to him in years, but I've interviewed him a number of times over the years, who was one of the most interesting people for me, like in my composing of all the material that was meaningful to me. And his name is Shan Grro. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but his YouTube channel is Industrial Surrealism. And he documented for a number of years what he called cloud-cloaked craft that he was filming outside of his home in Louisiana. And he, documented this hardcore for a couple of years. And there was a lot of consequences on some levels for his life from what he was doing, right? And eventually he kind of got to the place where he felt like he had made as much sense of it as he could at this time. And he kind of moved on. He was an artist to begin with and whatnot. But interestingly enough, he has a mark on his arm that he got like mysteriously during what he referred to me as his Jesuit education that looks like a gyroscope. It's like a birthmark in the shape of a gyro, or like a scar in the shape of a gyroscope, right?
Wow.
And some of the things that he dug into when he was trying to understand what these craft were pretty interesting. His stuff is all publicly available on YouTube, and there's interviews with him on Off Planet, Randy's Off Planet TV that I used to be a co-host on Off Planet with him. There's interviews with him there, and a number of other people interviewed him during a period of time. So between power plant, Boeing research facility, and basically a cloud cloaked craft, it had my attention on a number of levels. And then of course, that you were in Philadelphia, also is a big, it sort of was caught my attention. And there's a point later in the conversation where you guys refer to the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is my colleague and friend Michael Wan, who I mentioned earlier. So he lives in Pennsylvania too, and all of his storytelling is around the area. His stuff is about the Susquehanna River, right?
Okay.
But one of our listeners at one point sent us a photo of street signs at an intersection in Philadelphia that said Susquehanna and Moyer. There's literally an intersection that says that is Susquehanna and Moyer. It is not just a stone's throw, a few hundred yards, looks like on the map, from where the Naval Yard was, where the Philadelphia experiment was performed. And all of the streets in the neighborhood, and of course the neighborhood is called Fishtown, right? Like some states here, were like one block over was Mercer. Steve Mercer, who's Freeman's producer, is the person who introduced me to Michael Wan. Right on the corner of Susquehanna and Moyer, there's Wilson's Check Cashing. My girlfriend's name is Laura Wilson. All of the streets that are in the neighborhood are names of things that are sort of part of my setup in terms of like my own neural network of like things that I pay attention to or care about or whatever it is, right? And Michael and I have sort of played with some of these ideas. But as I've dug further and further back, like I do think that some of the things that were going on with my mom in her life and carried through to me do have to do with the Philadelphia experiment. And that our name, and that's granted, that's my father's name, but his family is partially from Pennsylvania, is right there, right? Literally just a few blocks from the Philadelphia experiment, I don't think is meaningless. When you were in Philadelphia, all this already had my attention. Have you ever done, so you're an electrical engineer, if I understand correctly?
No, I'm not an engineer. I'm just an electrician.
An electrician.
Hands-on guy. Yeah.
Okay. How did you end up at this job?
That is an important question that I have asked myself a lot about in the last 2 years, is how did I end up there? Because it just seemed, I seemed out of place. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I have been to some cool sites doing what I do, but they had just heard that I could do controls and sent me with this crew that I never worked with before. I think the company vetted me on one project or two projects, and then I was just kind of attached to this crew. I've done a little bit of work in power plants, but most of the control work I do is just on PLCs that control for temperature, and humidity and things like that. So
the people that you were on this job with, you met them in Philadelphia or you traveled with them from Colorado?
So I dropped my car off at the shop in the Springs. I thought maybe they'd do me a solid and come pick me up at my house in the company. Colorado Springs, yeah. Okay. So they requested that I bring my vehicle to the shop and leave it there for the 2 or 3 weeks that we were going to be working. So I did that. And then my dad eventually got a ride to Colorado Springs, picked up my car from the shop there, and drove it to Cleveland to pick me up from the second mental institution.
So Cleveland is also interesting for me. My mom is from Cleveland, right?
Yeah.
And the neighborhood that she's from Euclid, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And the layout of the streets in the neighborhood she lived in mirror exactly the layout of the streets in the neighborhood I live in right now, right? So there's something about the way neighborhoods are laid out that is like pretty interesting, but that this is Philadelphia and Cleveland were like sort of the start point and the end point. And then of course, Colorado Springs being home of NORAD and all of this other stuff. But also actually my girlfriend, Laura, who I just mentioned, she was living in Colorado Springs when I met her, and her next door neighbor was working at NORAD. Right. So none of this sounds surprising. So you went there, you traveled from Colorado by automobile or by plane with the people?
So it was three of us, the two guys and myself. And the funny thing was, on our way out there, like in Nebraska or something, we were all taking turns driving, had to stop and get gas in Nebraska. And at the gas station, we met with someone that was on a crew member that they knew. I didn't know him, but he was on a different crew, headed to a different job. And then for the last few days of the trip, he came to Chester. He wasn't initially intending to be part of the crew, but here he was out in Chester. So
you just bumped into him at the gas station?
At a gas station. He's going one way, we're going the other, and we run into a gas station. And this is not a large company. They probably have maybe a crew of 20 people. It was very strange.
Have you ever worked at a Boeing facility before?
No, I have not. But if you name some of the other aerospace contractors, then I would say yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know. Okay. So this was so while you don't, is it possible that you were really there doing something for Boeing, even though you thought you were there doing something for a power plant?
Yeah, that's very possible, because it was just utilities. It was just a power plant. I guess anybody could own it, but that's interesting.
So okay, so the reason that this thing that you saw, right? It's a rotor or rotary blade that you're making the jump in your head is somehow connected to it's this craft is outside of a place where they're researching rotary blades at a Boeing facility, right? So in your head, are you making the jump that this is some sort of like interdimensional rotary blade, or are these are separate? I mean, I don't mean at the time, but I mean now. Do you think they're this one and the same?
I guess I just have never seen anything fly like that. I understand the mechanics of lift, and I understand what's happening with a helicopter or a drone or something, or even an F-35. I get the physics there. This thing was abiding by a set of rules I just never seen with my own eyes before.
It was from the when you first saw it till it went out of sight, was it moving the same way the whole time, or did it change the way that it was being propelled?
It looked like it was heavy. It looked like it was a heavy kind of, it didn't look like it was made out of plastic. It looked like it was made out of something heavy. And it just tumbled like that. Like, if you hit a hockey puck, like a slap shot, it flies nice and level right at the goal. But if you hit it wrong, it kind of bounces around on the ice, but it still moves in the direction you hit it, but it bounces around.
Yeah.
It doesn't fly flat on the ice, and that's what it was doing.
When I was re-listening to a little section today, because like I took my notes when I was preparing a few weeks ago, then I just kind of tried to sink back into the space that I was in. Like I got sort of a visual of like it goes this way and then this way and then this way, and it was kind of not coordinated. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. You got it.
Okay. All right. You talked, so this is going to sound silly and stupid, but like, have you ever seen Men in Black and there's like the Neuralyzer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this almost feels to me like this was like a reverse Neuralyzer, right? Rather than wiping your mind, right?
Wow.
It actually like opened up some, like whether it was like a frequency that was generated that opened up like a new synaptic pattern, because you talked about starting to have downloads immediately from that point forward. The downloads started, you're sending weird texts, you're having what you were referring to as telepathy, and you were seeing time as like a flattened disc rather than sort of linear, right? And that you were starting to make major connections about things from your childhood.
Yes.
Do I have that? Do I understand that? Okay.
You got it.
Sounds a lot to me like what happened the first time I ever did cocaine and the first time I ever did meth. Okay. And this is not me accusing you of being a secret drug addict, but
no, it's all right. It's all right.
What those things do is they change your frequency for sure, but stimulate new sort of neurons and synaptic patterns in your brain immediately. Right. Do you have any history of drug use? It's not a judgment or
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've done them all. I've never done heroin.
Okay.
But I'm just too curious a guy. I have to know what these things feel like. So some of my favorite drugs are, I'll say here's my favorite drug is probably cocaine. I think it's terrific.
Right.
I would make it legal like that if I had the power, you know. But I don't do it. I do it sporadically, if at all. It can be expensive and hard to find, so it's not practical to do a lot of cocaine in my book. But I'd also synthesized DMT from Acacia mimosa, which was it was so powerful that nothing Terence McKenna wrote about or nothing anybody said except this thing that Terence McKenna said, which I heard only after experimenting with DMT. He said, "You won't die. It'll feel like you're dying, but you won't die unless you could die from astonishment."
Yep.
And after I heard that, I was like, "Oh, he nailed it right there. That's exactly what it is. It's very astonishing to see your whole reality change and be completely in a new place." You know.
So does this way that you were feeling during those couple of days with all the downloads and the connections, does that for you feel in any way similar to cocaine for you?
No, because I think cocaine for me tends to in all the worst cliche ways make me way more egoic.
Okay.
And this was like a more closer to a psilocybe or an LSD kind of feeling. I didn't have any drugs on this trip, but that's what it felt like. Yeah.
I didn't think you were on drugs. So for me, like what I was sort of sensing was that whatever this thing was, it was generating a frequency field that connected with you or touched you and put you into the wide open state that a person often gets into when they're on certain kind of drugs in terms of being able to pick things up from the field. It's like an enhanced sort of synaptic neural connection type of thing, right? That I remember the first time I ever did cocaine. I smoked crack the first time I ever did cocaine. I realized how all the songs on the radio were about the thing I was actually doing at that moment that I was doing it, right? Literally I was driving home and I found myself listening to Tom Petty as I was driving on Mulholland Drive, right?
Whoa.
Kind of
all
thing.
The vampires come down from Mulholland. Yeah.
Right. It all synced up. And it was almost like I would stop. If I stopped the song, reality turned off for a second and then I'd turn it back on. And what's interesting is all the drugs that I cocaine and meth, both for me were, came into my life during periods of time when I was either living on one end or the other end of the Boeing base. Well, it was originally the Rocketdyne base, but then became the Boeing base that I sort of grew up near. Right. But it made me feel an enhanced sense of telepathy and in a non-paranoid way, almost like something about the world was watching me and singing my world, singing it to me. Right. And I wasn't paranoid because I didn't even know to be paranoid. The first time I ever smoked crack, I didn't even understand what I was doing. So you can't really know something is wrong or something if you don't even know what you're doing. I didn't know that it made people paranoid. I wasn't thinking about cops or getting in trouble or whatever it is. It was I just felt suddenly everything around me, it was like Truman Show. It was somehow about me or whatever it was.
Yeah.
and that I had this strong, like I could predict the next song that was going to come on the radio. I could, whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
And the way that and it also made me start flashing back to moments in time in my life that were correlated to songs, television shows, movies, and like weird memories or like dreams that I couldn't quite put together. And that sounds similar to what's happening for you.
It does. It does sound similar. There was something I never have mentioned that, in any conversation, but with you talking, it just jogged my memory that all the water that we consumed on the trip came from these like plastic bottled waters that look kind of similar to an Aquafina bottle, but they came from Walmart. And it was specifically this Walmart. And I remember thinking, I've seen lots of different bottled waters both on sale at the gas station when I go into the gas station, right? I'd never seen these before. It was a yellow label. It was like life water or something like that. And I haven't seen it. I'd never seen it before, and I haven't seen it since. It was like only there on that trip, and it's what you'd think they would have bought a variety, and instead it was always the same yellow brand. And it reminded me of the movie Repo Men, where all the cans have like generic cereal, generic beer. Have you ever seen that movie?
I haven't seen it. Yeah, no. But I know the kind of thing you're talking about, though. I understand what you're talking about.
And I did wonder to myself, because everybody had asked the obvious question: do you think you were drugged, or do you think that was even possible? And I thought, I did see that weird bottled water that stuck out to me. It didn't taste funny or weird, but yeah, that would be one way.
It's funny that you say that, because I can't tell you the number of times that I have ended up in a situation that didn't feel right to me, and the answer, the two things became the answer: don't drink the water and don't go to the bathroom here. Right.
Wow.
And so I remember being at the nightclub in San Diego. I went with my friend to hear a DJ that I like, and I noticed something really weird, that like he had some like cord on his arm that connected to a light that was like glowing this blue color. It wasn't like a raver's like light stick thing. This looked like some kind of technology, and that the bottles of water that people were drinking in the club were glowing that same color.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, well, so it was almost like, is there like a frequency, like a blue light frequency, that the sound is sort of cymatic or doing something different to that? Then, so the whole thing became, don't drink any water, don't go to the bathroom here, don't, you know what I mean? Like, and a number of times in my life that has become like the answer to some strange thing I notice when I'm in a heightened state, whether it's like a naturally heightened state or if I'm on drugs at a party or something like that. So it's interesting that you say that. And it's interesting to me that the bathroom option for you was the porta potty. I have a lot of ideas about porta potties.
Well, what's so interesting is because I went way out of my way to go out there, right? And you know how sometimes like, well, I'm already here, I might as well try to go. And in this case, if I had done that, I would have missed this craft. So instead, I turned around. The tent blowing over got my attention at first, but on my way back in, I saw that thing. I saw this craft, and it was like, yeah, it was almost like I had a date with destiny to walk out there at that moment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like something was synced up, whether like someone or just the universe more at large was like, you're ready for this. And so here it is.
Emily, can I break in here for 1 second?
Yeah.
In my research of this area, the Chester, Pennsylvania area, the town that the Boeing plant is in is called Ridley Park.
Oh, interesting.
And the Indians of that town, side note, there's a famous lacrosse player named Brett Moyer from this.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
But the interesting thing about the indigenous people of that town is that they are known as the Lenni Lenape.
The Lenape. Yep.
Yes. And
Michael talked about them before. Yep.
right. And the translation of the name of Lenny Lenape is genuine, pure, real, original, real person, original person.
Not surprising at all. While you're just curious, if you while we're talking, do you want to see if there's any cave paintings or any like art sites with these Indians? I'd be interested to see that.
Sure.
Okay, so in the interest of getting somewhere, I'm going to start moving through some things. So
Okay.
you took Easter off. You had the most amount of downloads that day, right?
Yeah.
It's a Sunday. It's a sacred day for some reason that I'm sure is different than the reason that they tell us, but probably on some level correlated. And you said you think you may have had some lost time. Is that just because you think that because you weren't really paying attention to time, or like you had some of those experiences like where you realize that like, oh my God, I just like got somewhere from point A to point B and I don't remember how I got here exactly. Like, what was the reason that you think that?
Well, it was because the day I went to the mental facility in Chester, it was first thing in the morning. And then what I thought that maybe an hour had gone by and it was already dark. It was already pitch black, like nighttime dark when we crossed the pavilion over to the other side of this facility.
But that was the next day. Why do you think you lost time on Easter?
Oh, on Easter?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I lost any time on Easter. I just didn't work that day. Everybody else did.
Okay. I feel like I thought I heard you say that you thought you'd lost some time that day when you were having downloads. So maybe I misunderstood. Okay. So then
I was more talking about in the work sense. I lost time that I could have billed for.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Yeah. So then the next day we have the $6,000 and the lighters. Any insight at this point on what would motivate? Like, I understand if you were in a doomsday state of mind, which you mentioned when you were explaining some other things throughout the episode, why the $6,000, but the pack of lighters, if you're not a smoker, like, do you have any other like ideas around why like those things and why they were sort of connected?
I can explain why I had the cash was just to think like if something bad happened and shit hit the fan, at least I'd have some cash on me. So that, and then the lighters really were the same logic. I just thought, good to have a lighter around just in case you need to start a fire.
Okay, is that your normal state of like when you go places thinking that like something apocalyptic might happen and you better be prepared?
Fine. I don't know about you.
No, not really. It was just the sham presidency, this like the state of the country. And it just felt like anything could kick off at any moment. So afterwards, I don't do that anymore. Like in the last 2 years, I'm not a rabid prepper. And I'm not constantly like thinking about bug out gears and bug out bags and things like that. So yeah, my paranoia level went down to about 0 after the trip. So
right. Okay. All right.
You burned it all off.
You had those things and you had guns, right? Like, which like that sounds kind of like why would somebody travel across the country with people they didn't know with guns, that much cash, and then the lighters? But there's a gentleman who has enjoyed in humorous and playful ways toying with Michael and I. We haven't heard from him in a couple of years, but his name is Cameron Crime Fighter, and he changed
God-given name, huh?
Well, he changed his name to Cameron Crime Fighter, and lots of his communications are coded with CC or the number 33, so CC, right? And he likes to send people gifts and sort of help them to understand maybe some Masonic principles through trying to understand the gift. And he went into a government building with a gun at one point and laid it down. Like, you know, the government built the Capitol, like they have the dome and then there's like the emblem on the ground underneath that. And he laid it down with some flowers. And it was like a very weird thing. And he ended up eventually sort of getting arrested, but getting out of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
he also was able to get himself out of the situation. Like, he did not go there to harm anyone. He was going there under the guise of like it being connected, like says like a memorial to like all of these people who like in shootings or whatever, right? But I think he also had decided the moment had come that he needed to tempt the system and prove that he could sort of push through that invisible wall or the fourth wall and okay, because he knew his intentions were pure. So you can find articles about it on the internet if you look up Cameron Crime Fighter Utah or whatever it is. But
Okay.
I only found out about this when this gentleman started sending Michael and I gifts, and it's someone that Michael has interacted with a little bit, but there's probably a fair amount of crossover between some of that experience and some of your experience. And so you know, that made me think of that. And then the only real question I have, I mean, like I probably would never do the thing that you did about the cash and the lighters or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I see that for some people that would be fun, humorous thing to do on the trip with the guys, especially if you had a certain either rapport with them or like no rapport at all, and you're trying to sort of, you know, shake the situation up or break the ice. But the one question I have that I can't quite get my head around was why the rape threat? Like, that's to me the one piece in all of this that is sort of an outlier from the rest of your behavior.
I thought of the thing that would be most terrifying about the situation would be as a man, if you leave your wife and children around defenseless, where that would be worse than any kind of threat you could make to their, you know, to their bodily person. You know, instead of like, they're gonna come around and smash your fingers with a hammer. Like for one thing, that whole text was kind of dictated to me, and I was thinking like, maybe that sounds a little bit. You can't ignore it. It can't be like, I didn't hear that, you know? Oh, I didn't hear that. You definitely heard it. It was so that it couldn't be just like loud, just really loud.
It had a charge to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said it was dictated to you. So this was part of like the telepathic sort of information you were receiving from the universe about what the next logical step was throughout this
it was
experience?
Dictated to me by Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese and, you know, Bruce
But it
Willis.
was coming to you like through this sort of like telepathy that connected to movies and television shows and music and part of the downloads and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're like, you know, that seems like I'm wondering if it was that specific line that really tripped everything. Like everything would have been okay if it was just the piles of cash, just the lighters, just the $50 to that thing, and you hadn't said that when he's like, come on, if you had literally just said, oh, I'm just kidding, I'll be down in just a minute, if the whole other half of this would not have been, it would not have occurred.
Exactly.
Because I wanted it to sound like the reply would be like, oh, how dare you? You blasphemed the money, you know? Because I thought it would be pretty obvious that there was obviously not, that their wives and children were safe, right? I just assume that they would know that I don't have that kind of pull, and why would I?
But
you know what I'm saying? Plus, I'd also kind of prepped them with hypothetical questions, like what if this happened to you? What if a situation like this happened to you? And then I thought, well, why not just make it happen and find out for real instead of why have it be a hypothetical? Why not have it be a real situation?
And you only know these guys from this trip, right? You didn't.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you had no history with them prior to this. So that's a pretty wild thread of humor to throw out.
Yeah.
In a still
Yeah.
pond and see what effect it has. So I find that very interesting because I see that
Yeah,
as the turning point
your
too.
good point.
Emily.
Yeah, it's like it was written in such a way, and I have the exact text somewhere. I could just send it to you, but it's you could see for yourself, because it's, I wanted it to sound like make it feel real but not be real, right? The money was real, the lighters were real, and the text had to be real. And I sent it to them all three at the same time, so they'd all have this like note to compare, because I don't even know where these guys live, like I've never been to their houses or anything. So how would I even, they would have to believe that I was some agent of the CIA, right? And to the extent that I
Well.
was like, to the extent that I was some kind of like undercover agent posing as an electrician. So that was, for me, that was the fun part, is that they obviously took it somewhat seriously. They thought I was seriously mentally ill, or seriously could make good on my threats,